sword. It was larger, thicker, heavier, and cruder than any normal blade. By all accounts, it was no more than a hulking mass of iron.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, coming to you from parts unknown, it is DumpStat. I am the lich, the deep, dark, foreboding voice in your mind, telling you to steal that lollipop from that old man for no reason. It is I, Brill, the lich, the void, and of course, next to me, who has recently been freed from his shackles to have this conversation, is my co-host, Doc, the level 12 human fighter. How are you today, Doc?
What do you mean freed? I still have them on.
Shush. We're trying a different PR stunt. I realize that some people recently have been calling me a monster, and I was hoping to change the angle on that a little bit. Today, I want to talk to you, though, in very the same way of what I just said, about something that has hit 5e like a tank. Now, in every edition, there are many different kinds of things for you to play. From advanced to 5e, there's always going to be the weirder, more monstrous or strange races. But in 5e, centaurs, minotaurs, all of Volo's Guide, there is a ton for you to play as. Now, this has made role-playing very unique in 5e, and the parties very, very strange. I have recently DM'd a party which overwhelmingly was monstrous. There was no human or dwarf or gnome. I had a lizard folk. I had a minotaur. I had a centaur. I had one changeling. And finally, the most normal of them all was a dragonborn. So I had to, as a DM, look at this strange party of creatures that would probably be in any other fantasy sense hunted for their hide, and try to work it into a story in a way that felt meaningful and cool. Now, I also DM'd a different party where it was all normal folks, and then one minotaur. Now, that minotaur wanted to go into the bar with the rest of the party. And I, as a DM, told him that this is a medieval town of farmers. No. You cannot go into the tavern. And I actually had a very interesting discussion with that player, which is why I bring this topic to you today. These different races have become a new normal for the D&D party of now. But it definitely throws older school DMs for a loop. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in one sense, it's very cool that there's so many options. Being able to play like a goblin or a hobgoblin or an orc is cool to be able to have that ability and to be able to actually do that, especially if your entire party is like the quote unquote monstrous races, then you can do a lot with that. And I think that's really neat. But at the same time, it definitely takes away from the classic nature of what you think about in a Dungeons and Dragons party.
You think of the Lord of the Rings party.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't think of Lord of the Rings where Frodo Baggins teams up with the Uruk-hai and the goblins that were found in the mines of Moria.
Or a giant cat person who isn't a furry whatsoever. Don't call them that.
or just a giant, and it's just like, oh yeah, you don't think about it in those terms, but at the same time, like that becomes a very interesting challenge if you're running a game where you kind of have to flip the conceptions of what your world looks like upside down if you're going to let that happen, where monstrous races are adventuring alongside the dwarves and elves and humans and whatever else.
Now, I don't know about you, but when I look at this change, this turn, I think everybody, especially in the early editions, wanted to play a monster at some point, and that's cool.
Yeah.
And the solution was DM and you can play that monster, but you'll probably be attacking the party, or you could make an NPC that was maybe a monster. Now you could homebrew, which homebrewing is very touch and go about balance issues. Ever since I think Wizards of the Coast saw the success in 4E of a Dragonborn, because a dragon person marketing wise is genius. Yes. Everybody loves dragons. Everybody loves it. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Now, though, there seems to be an open floodgate of races to play. In Tome of Foes, there is a ton to customize your tiefling. There's sea elves. There's the monk elves of the Raven Queen. There's all these new little races that you can jump in as or play. Not to mention there's the races from the Magic the Gathering universe that you could slam into the Forgotten Realms.
Right.
So suddenly you have this wide variety of things to play, but do they all match? Does it make sense to allow all of them in your world? And I know it depends on your world, but I still kind of lean no. I had a big issue recently where I was reading through some of the monstrous races in Volo's guide, and I couldn't help shake the feeling that some of them felt like a cash grab for play. Like, of course, there are people who would love to play a tabaxi, right? Or love to play a goblin or a kobold. That makes sense to me.
Sure.
But when I looked at Kenku, which Kenkus are popular, I'm not knocking them down, looking at that mimic trait, that just is so hard to roleplay. And that doesn't feel thought out to me.
Yeah, usually I've seen that people either completely ignore that part of the Kenku, or they try to replicate it, and it just is it's difficult. Like, you have to accept the challenge in that.
Or might I add, the lore doesn't always feel fleshed out. For instance, this is something I was talking to someone just the other day. It really helped me inspired as this episode has been forming in my mind's eye. The Trident, Sea People, the Aquamans, right? Not popular.
Yep.
There are cooler things you can play from under the sea. A water genasi or a sea elf now kind of fit the bill and maybe fit it a little bit better. But the Tridents are known for cities. Their big lore piece is cities on the sea floor.
Yeah.
They don't have dark vision. They don't... You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, the Tritons, like when seeing some of those things and like how the Tritons work, it's like, why would these Tritons even come onto land?
Right.
And
like,
the ultimate answer to that is they probably wouldn't.
They wouldn't. And it's weird when you have the rubber meets the road on some of these races, when the lore meets actual gameplay. I mean, the hoops you would have to get to have a Triton warrior come on land and be like, yes, I'll help you, farmer, with this party and get those chickens. And maybe it's me not being a good enough DM to spin it, or maybe not being able to make believe in my mind's eye, but that is really hard from a DMing standpoint to make that work. And some DMs might just go, he's weird. He's the weird guy. He's the weird Trident that wants to come on. He's Ariel. He wants to be part of our world.
Well, and even thinking about like the Triton's abilities, they have cool abilities if you're playing a campaign that's in or near the water. But other than that, just from like I don't want to say power gaming standpoint, but as far as like what do I get out of playing this race? In this game, you don't get a whole lot if you're playing on land.
Yeah.
I mean, you get some control over, you can cast Fog Cloud, you can cast Gust of Wind, but if you're nowhere near water, then Wall of Water is, that can be spotty, depending on what your DM. But, Emissary of the Sea, completely, like, if you're in the desert, forget it,
Right. And maybe that's a session 0 discussion with your DM, like, hey, would this make sense for me to play? Are we going to hit the pyramids? Right. Would my Trident be chill with that?
Yeah.
I think all that makes sense, but I think the broader issue that you're looking at here is I feel like some of those monstrous races, even with like, let's say Azamar 2, while they're cool to see and cool to play, in actual function, I wonder how much is marketing and Wizards of the Coast going, well, we know you like Dragonborns. And I also think it's, as 5e progresses, and we maybe even get a 5.5, I don't think 5e is going away anytime soon. It might just get more refined and more modules.
Yeah.
We're probably going to get more races. And we are going to hit that point where almost every humanoid race is almost officially playable.
Yeah.
And does that make sense? I've been saying for years now that mind flayers are going to be playable soon.
Yep.
And it's because of how many people love them. The Gith are already playable.
Yep.
Thanks to Tome of Foes.
Yep. I actually really liked the Gith. Like personally, just I liked, some of the things that they brought to the table, but that's not to say that there is this sort of, I don't want to call it an issue. I'm going to call it a challenge where, it's like if you have a group of 10 players and 4 of them play at any given session, it's possible that that pool of 10 players, statistically, no one would probably be human or elf or dwarf. Now, humans and elves and dwarves are cool, and there's reasons that you picked them, but there's enough out there that having a party of adventurers walk into a town and be able to kind of blend in just by looking like the similar population is a lot less likely because of the cool things that are offered from the monstrous races.
It's a power trip a bit with the monstrous races. You get to be cool.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with being cool like that. And I'm totally for that. But as far as what does your setting look like? Do you have bands of warriors that are walking around that are just like, oh, holy crap, there's a Genasi and, an Arakocra and a Goliath and a Tenku. It's just like, how?
And a Luxodon.
Yeah. How frequent?
How'd you meet?
Right. How what did that look like?
And then they're like, well, we were all at the same tavern.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, there's nothing wrong with that from a players having fun standpoint, but from a lore standpoint, that becomes a bigger challenge for the DM to kind of make that congruent to the world and complementary to the world.
Well, I mean, even like you said with the Gith, right? You said you like the Gith.
Yep.
Now, I am anti-Gith. Not anti-Gith, but I am...
Oh, man.
I've never bought into it. I've never...
This is why you became an evil lich, isn't it?
This is absolutely true. And maybe it's because, and by the way, my heart goes out to people who want to play monstrous races. My first character I ever played, I know I've said this before on the podcast, my DM let me have the monster manual just to look at it, to get my hooks in. Right, to see what could happen. This is 3.5. And I saw a Mind Flayer and I said, I want to play that. Mm-hmm. And my DM said, okay, so I know what it's like to want to play a monster. And that's probably why I hate the Gith. Deep down, #Mind Flayers. But I've looked at their lore and I've never been gravitated to it. I've never had it's the same thing with Drow for me. Mm-hmm. I've never wanted to play a Drow. Yep. And I don't know why that is. And there's always going to be other, I don't want to play a lizard folk. That seems just kind of quirky. There are just certain things that I've never been gravitated to. Yum. However, Gith stuff, I mean, it's in Baldur's Gate. It's blown up. Yeah. Like you said before, where would you ever meet a Triton? Where would you ever meet a Gith Yankee?
Unless if they came crashing down in Baldur's Gate after fighting a giant mind flayer ship.
Right. Unless you're a halfling that just casually traveled the astral sea, what the fuck are you doing with this green elf guy? Yeah. That to me is where things kind of get weird. Like we said before, how do you make it congruent? How do you make the lore make sense? And do you even need it to make sense? I've been in parties where it was this open secret that everybody just ignores the fact that our races were mortal enemies, or that that we shouldn't hang out, frankly. Mm-hmm. It's a little weird. I've also been in a party that we accidentally all played Lexodons. I'm not even kidding. That was quite good.
That's kind of amazing.
Yeah. But it was the classic, we're all in the tavern. It was a human tavern, human and gnomish tavern. And then just fucking 4 elephants show up.
Yeah.
That don't know each other. They did not know each other. And they all sat down in different parts of the bar doing the Aragon thing where they're all brooding in the corner. And it's and then Like,
no one wanted to address the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah, exactly. The elephants in the room. And then, of course, the guy who hired us brings us all together is just like, you all have a special skill. And I looked far and wide, and I was like, did you look far and wide, or did you just look at the elephant homeland?
Right.
Because it looks like you looked at one section of the map. You didn't look all over. You found us.
Right.
And that's just, it was actually pretty funny. And by the way, 2 of them were paladins. So it was 2 paladins, 1 barbarian, and then 1 bard. And it was just elephants. And we never forgot that session.
That is beautiful.
Yeah. He's the bard kept it in his trunk. Listen, what I'm trying to get at though is it's weird, and I also think that it breaks lore to a point where it can hurt a story or hurt a DM, and that's why there's this back and forth with DMs that want to limit what you can play as.
Yeah.
If I had a player and I knew my campaign setting and it's session 0 and he goes, man, oh man, I am gonna be a feral tiefling who is like straight out of hell. Yeah. And I'm like, that would be the strangest thing to throw. Maybe not the strangest. Maybe an Aarakocra. You know, I want to be a giant pigeon. That might throw us off. You might want to say no, and that could make players upset.
This is kind of interesting because I actually know somebody that when they built their world, they did the population calculations, right? They figured out what percentages of people in their world were humans.
Ew.
Yeah, they went, you know, not just
they went
waist
hard
deep
in
in this. They went super into this, but they found the percentages of that. And basically, the players that they invited to the campaign, including me, they said, hey, here's the deal with this world. I want to reflect a more realistic world. I want this to be a more realistic campaign. And for the adventuring party, I'd like it to reflect that world. So when you're choosing your race, if you want to choose to be the Aarakocra, right? That's great, but there's probably a 1 in 10 chance that you're Aarakocra compared to where you have a 1 in 2 chance of being a human,
right? According
to the statistics of the world. So roll on this table, and this table will tell you kind of which expanse of races that you can choose from. And it was a limiting factor in what kind of races that you should choose to be in selecting and playing. And I know some people weren't as keen on that, but it did invite this idea that, hey, some of these races are a lot more rare. And it got reinforced in the rules of his actual campaign that some of these races that you could play were rare. And if you did have a tiefling in your party, that was a special tiefling, right? That was a like, hey, this guy is rare. And it made his character inherently more interesting because that person played a tiefling and they rolled for that and got it.
Wow.
Whereas because I'm a human, I'm not special at all, you know, because I'm literally, I literally rolled in this one huge session that I could have rolled. And it's like, yep, you're a human. So like it was limiting.
Right.
And I'm not recommending that everybody do this, but I thought that was interesting. It was a very interesting and different way to play that. And I did kind of like it. I wouldn't want that for every game that I played, but I did like how it gave some mechanical inherent value to the more, I don't want to say special, but these kind of monstrous, interesting various races that are available.
Right. And I think for me, at least, it does make them more special. You know what I was thinking about?
What is that?
I was in a campaign not too long ago, and I think that we were playing Waterdeep. Now, I've played Waterdeep before, and one of the concepts in Waterdeep that people sometimes play around with is the fact that all people walk amongst the streets, right? Mm-hmm. And it kind of took the shine off of some of the monstrous races for me.
Okay.
Just because I was walking around the street and they're like, here's a centaur. And I'm like, oh, aren't you supposed to be like wandering nomad awesome guys? And he's like, yep. But here I'm shoveling poop. And you're like, okay. And then you kept moving. Yeah. And then when you go to like their Underdark area, you just had fucking mind flayers just kind of walking around. And I'm like, mind flayers should not be casual. There are certain monsters and certain like a dragon. I know that there's always that impulse to just toss in a dragon into a campaign.
Yep.
I like to make my dragons built up and rare and really special, and you had to work to get to see them, and there's a lot of pomp and circumstance behind them. Because when I want my players to meet a dragon, I don't want them to be like, oh, dragons are kind of whatever. I want them to go, holy shit, that's a dragon. That's not going to happen every campaign.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And from my couple trips to Waterdeep, I think that's something about it that doesn't really appeal to me. Now, I don't know if I would want to do population rolls just because there might always be that one player that goes like, I'm doing a gnome, period. You know, like that is, I am a gnome tonight. And, you know, like, and you have to, which by the way, no one's ever said, but there has to be that back of, actually, here's a quick question, just because I know we have other parts of this topic we want to get into. Sure. But this is something that I've realized, and this comes from too many hours of D&D. I don't know how many hours with a wide variety of people all over the world. What is a race you've never seen someone play at? Like you've never seen this race played before?
That's a good question.
I know. I finally have mine.
You know, I'm going to let me look this up real quick.
Yeah, go on D&D Beyond. They'll give you the...
Again, we're not sponsored by D&D Beyond, but I love it. So there you go.
It's a tool.
Yeah.
Here, I'll give you mine while you look it up.
Sure, that sounds good.
I have never, in my whole career, ever, and I don't believe they exist, it's a conspiracy. Hobgoblin players do not exist. There is never have I ever seen a hobgoblin player ever. And there are reasons as to why. It's the same reason why I barely ever see them as a monster in an encounter. I've seen them once used in an encounter. It's because if you want to use them in an encounter, there are other military races that are cooler than them that you can use. And also, if you're gonna use a goblin, use a goblin. Yeah. If you want to make them military and smart, there are other ones that you can use. And as far as players wise, what do you get from playing a hobgoblin that you can't get from like a stern drow or an actual goblin? Yeah. It's so interesting to me because I was talking to my kobold friend and I was like, what?
You have those?
A few. They're minions. I don't know if I should call them friends.
No, I was talking about friends. Yeah. That
fine. Minions. Okay. I was talking to one of my kobold minions. Fine. I was talking to one of my kobold minions, and he mentioned to me something I hadn't thought before, which was we were basically going through the different playable races and essentially mocking the idea of, you know, like I said before, 4 elephants, you know, casually showing up as if it's that French children's book I forget the name of. We were looking through it and he's like, I've never in my life seen someone play a hobgoblin. Yeah. And I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I think I've seen everything else. Yep. I think that's the one. And it made me laugh really, really hard just because I broke it down and I think hobgoblins don't exist. I think they're a conspiracy. I think they've never existed. I don't think DMs use it.
That is fair. You know, I feel like that hobgoblins would even be more approachable than bugbears, but I've seen a bugbear played before.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why hobgoblins...
Bugbears make the best rogues, bro.
Hobgoblins are like decent to play. They have like good things. Like they've got +2 constitution, +1 intelligence. So like... nice if you're building a wizard and you don't want to immediately die. Although, you know, like you could do definitely the war wizard with the hobgoblin easily.
Right.
But yeah, that is interesting. Well, I have my answer.
Oh.
So this includes races that I've seen played by other people that weren't related to my campaigns, aka Critical Role and other things that I've seen streamed and played online. Yuan-ti.
Oh.
I have not seen anyone touch Yuan-ti. I'm not sure why. But I honestly don't know. Like Yuan-ti are interesting because, they have this like really creepy, interesting backstory. They make great spies and also like illusionists and have some really cool magic capabilities that you can stack with being a martial class. But I've never seen Yuan-ti played. Other rare ones, which I'm not going to include Eberron, and I'm not going to include Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica.
Right.
And I'm not going to include the Lokatha because that Lokatha are weird in that they're
I've seen them played.
Interesting. I haven't seen them played, but like I'm also just kind of like, I don't know. I'm going to leave them alone. But
to your Yuan-ti point?
Yeah,
Yeah, continue. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. To the Yuan-ti.
I'm sorry.
No, hey, it's all good, buddy. So no. Yuan-ti, I just don't know. To me, like I looked at Yuan-ti and it's like, hey, like these guys are kind of interesting, right? They got this creepy backgrounds. You've got definitely a espionage sort of like, well, why could you be adventuring? Well, you're going to try to improve, your Yuan-ti clan. You're going to try to gather information. You're doing something for some Dark Lord somewhere. Like they have things like magic resistance, advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. Like, holy cow, that's great. Advantage on saving throws?
That's overpowered.
Yeah, that's stupid overpowered. Why have I never seen any of my max players play Yuan-ti? I don't know.
Right.
It's
because they don't want to be snakes.
Well, yeah. I think that might be part of it, is that there could be like a cultural sort of aversion to it, both real life.
Ew, snakes.
There's a lot of cultures that look at snakes for, ingrained religious, just other cultural societal reasons, that snakes are weird.
Sure.
Snakes are quote unquote evil. And that, Yuan-ti could be an extension of that. And then so I think that there could be pushing away from that.
I'll give you something.
Sure.
I have seen 2 Yuan-tis played.
Okay.
But I don't know if they were purebloods. Okay, maybe you can enlighten me.
Sure.
A pureblood has legs, right?
Yeah, so the pureblood, they are humans. They've started out as humans or humanoids, and they've been transformed to the Yuan-ti side of the Force. What? And so they now have these snake-like transformative properties that make them more like the snake race. They can't transform into snakes, right? They're not like changelings or anything like that. But, their eyes have changed a little bit. They now know these languages that the Yuan-ti have, and they gain some of the properties that maybe if a Yuan-ti pureblood were to find a mate in the Yuan-ti community, their children would be able to change into snakes.
Okay.
But a changeling or a Yuan-ti pureblood does not gain that ability to change into a snake.
Okay. So I've seen 2 players play it. One was a member of the Horizon Kingdoms RPG.
Okay.
And immediately...
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
Immediately dropped a lot of the Yuan-ti lore and backstory to instead try to shift their character to be a vampire. They, for some reason, it just did not stick to them.
Yeah.
The other one happens to be Mrs. Lich, my missus.
Oh.
The Lady Lich. She, when she first started out in D&D, was looking through the different races you could play.
Sure.
And knowing my lady, who in real life is essentially a druid, and she has a very amazing green thumb.
She multi-classed into Disney princess. Is that right? Am I allowed to say that word, the D word?
Yes, we're sued.
All
Good
right.
night. No, but we're owned by Disney already. But so she, my druid Lady Lich partner, she loves animals and she works with animals, and that's her profession, is being a druid. So I immediately, when we tried to get her into D&D, I leaned into the monstrous races because, again, they are great starters to get people interested.
Yeah.
So I showed her Volo's guide, and the Yuan-ti spoke to her.
Yeah.
She wanted to play a snake warlock with that magic resistance, and she did.
Yeah.
But again, dropped all Yuan-ti connotations. She did not really talk about the culture or anything like that. And I think that's because the Yuan-ti have an identity crisis? Are they cool spies that sneak into other societies and destroy them? Or are they Quetzalcoatl Aztec civilization building evil empires? Are they both?
Yum.
Because both is kind of a weird mix to have these snake conquerors who do sacrifices and crazy magic and have jungle tombs, and then to also have them do the worm tongue thing all the time in different countries. And while you can have both, I think it's a mixture of people not knowing what exactly they are and the fact that, frankly, that Aztec aesthetic, I don't think has been as adopted in the mainstream. I guess you might say zeitgeist as other aesthetics. The Nordic aesthetic, the Greek aesthetic, the Eastern Chinese or Japanese aesthetics to their own, I think have all been adopted, especially, in medieval knights, of course. I don't think they have really been taken in quite the same way.
Something else to think of is that in Dungeons and Dragons, like revealing what your class is or revealing what your race is when you're trying to keep it kind of under tabs can be a lot of fun. With like ASMR, if you're playing an ASMR, it's always fun to be like, oh, yep, I sprout wings, and everybody being like, what? And, just like freaking out because like, oh my God, now you're flying around and healing people and shooting people. Oh my God. And freaking people out. But then you have something like Yuan-ti, and then it's like, wait, you have magic resistance? How do you have magic resistance?
I'm a Yuan-ti, bro.
Yuan-ti blood. And immediately there's like a kind of shift at the table because it's like, Yuan-ti just means bad news, generally speaking.
And there are quite a few races that are the bad news bears races. Drow are also one of them. And I know you recently were looking into a Twitter feud or some kind of debate over orcs. And if orcs are just inherently bad and should just be bad in all contexts, is that what I'm getting at? Please explain.
So let's go over this because this is important when we're talking about monstrous races in Dungeons and Dragons. This is something good to think about in your games. Recently, and this was maybe about a week or 2 weeks ago, there was a Twitter debate of whether orcs being evil is racist. Now, this goes back to talking about mainly the Tolkienese representation of orcs. Originally, when he had designed the orcs in some of his notes, Tolkien had assigned or specifically tried to design orcs to have undesirable traits according to the typical European view. And so he quite frankly, he presented some of these features that were similar to the Mongol people and other Asiatic people, which isn't great. And
it's the opposite of great.
it's bad. And Tolkien later expressed grief over this and was not happy that he had done this. But there's also kind of a debate of how does consciousness affect a race? Because Tolkien designed his orcs to be monsters, literally monsters that were created by an evil being to be evil, to kill and exercise this evil being's
we
will.
all remember the orc birthing scenes from the Lord of the Rings movies.
Exactly. And, in Dungeons and Dragons, for the most part, orcs are different from that.
Right.
Orcs are birthed. They're not created. They are a race.
Hell, you could even have half orcs.
Yeah, exactly. But then even then there's some issues that come up with the design of orcs in the game and some of the original wordings in the player's handbook, which from my understanding, they're working on fixing, but those issues are there.
Right.
And if you want to know more, you can look up #orcs on Twitter, find all of that debate.
Such a funny hashtag. #orcs.
Yeah. #orcs. I think that it's an interesting thing to think about because how you treat these issues can affect your own, and this is getting kind of deep, and I realize that, but how you treat some of these concepts and ideas can affect your real world thinking.
Sure.
Now that sounds a little bit insane, but bear with me. Example, you're reading a book and the book describes, just another group of people. And the other group of people being, I don't know, just another skin color or something, for example, and just, oh yeah, describes this other group of people as just being inherently bad and evil, and thus your heroes of the story just mercilessly kill all of them, right? And if you sit there and you think to yourself, oh, that was a good thing to do, you're kind of overlooking some of the implications of that.
Sure.
And how that could affect your thinking, because you might be subtly accepting, hey, these people were different and I was told that they're evil, therefore they're evil and they should die. That's not a great line of thinking, even if it's just taking it from fiction, right? Having good evaluation of the fiction that you're consuming is very important, no matter what medium you're consuming, whether it be movies, Dungeons and Dragons, another role-playing game, books, music, but just whatever. So that's kind of where, in this conversation, that comes up, where we say, when you have monstrous races, how does their presentation in your world get affected? And does saying orcs are evil, is that, quote unquote racist? Or is there a reason that they're evil? Or is that a misconception in your world?
Right. And if I could jump on, I know that there's going to be some people, because I've seen this quite a bit from the community, especially some of the older types in our lovely community, will always give the 2 cents of, this is a game. Why are you bringing real world stuff into my game? I don't like it. And those are what we call children. But when you are dealing with anything in any media, anywhere, and that medium is expressing real world tangible concepts like racism, war, violence, you need to actually think about these things. Do not just passively go, well, we're just doing a campaign that has all of those elements in it. As a DM, are you implying that those things are good? You shouldn't. Are the people who are genociding bad people in your world? They should be. There are just things that when you're telling a story or creating a story that you have to be wary of. And to have a story that's interactive the way that D&D is, you should have a bit of tact when you undergo serious conversations in that world or topics. I mean, we all have done campaigns where a genocide or a war or a kidnapping occurs. It's kind of part of the game. This medieval world is rather violent. Fighting is part of the deal. But when you're doing that, you should do a few things. Make sure that you're not ostracizing a player. Maybe one of your players has gone through something possibly parallel to this, and I know they haven't been kidnapped by bugbears, but you get what I'm saying. And if you can tell someone's uncomfortable with the subject that you're putting out as a DM, maybe read the room. I recently had a player who is of the faith, of a faith. And frankly, if you know me, I'm a very blasphemous type DM. I bring up the dead and I play around with true evil.
The lich is blasphemous?
Yeah.
Wait.
Absolutely. Not devout in the slightest. Only to me, baby. Devout. Bow to me.
Sure.
But I had this player who came up to me and politely said, hey, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with how you're portraying religion. Is there anything good you have to say about it?
Sure.
Could I? And then it kind of led to this player eventually playing a cleric and eventually playing in the same way about how, life imitates art, playing a cleric. And that cleric was essentially the give charity and feed the masses and love others type of believer in their particular God. And it was interesting, though, to have that back and forth. I've also had certain players who have ostracized other players through basically saying, hey, this is D&D, this is what we do here, why are you uncomfortable? So that is all to say that when you are DMing or playing this game, like in anything with other humans, just be fucking aware of who you're dealing with. And I want to get off this soapbox because I know this conversation does make people uncomfortable and nobody has right answers.
Sure.
I will say this. When it comes to the racism of a fantasy world, there are things that I think can slide, and then there are not things that I think are a bit weird.
Right.
For instance, I think that if you are playing a drow and the DM has a racist NPC towards you, and that is because all the drow this guy has ever met have, enslaved his people, that can kind of make sense. You can kind of see where things are coming from. The Underdark is not a nice place. Stereotypes abound. This is a fantasy world. Racism will happen, right? But there's a way to do that in a way that doesn't ostracize a player to the point where they can't play.
Yeah.
I've had players who I've kind of had to put a blind eye to certain things just to help their particular character get through the day.
Yep.
And then, while there are monstrous races, there are just monsters.
Yep.
I'm fine with being racist towards mind flayers. That's their shtick.
Yeah.
Their only shtick until eventually mind flayers become, we'll say, not aberrations of a Balan malicious evil controlled by a giant elder brain bent on human destruction. When that eventually becomes, well, there are also mind flayers that are, not of that and are good. And they're playable now.
Yeah.
That's when you kind of have to start to begin the conversation on nuance. And I know I'm jumping around a little bit here because this topic, once you dig into these uncomfortable conversations about racial coding in a fantasy world, it gets heated. And you kind of want to batten down the hatches everywhere. I, as just even talking about this, have this insatiable need to and this and that and don't do that, and just pat down all the possible where the water might come out, like that old gag.
And I think it's also important to note that the needs and the expectations and also the dialogue will always kind of shift, and hopefully for the more positive in that sense. But, we're always going to be learning. It's just important that we try to learn how, this is going to sound cheesy, but seriously, be kind to one another, to love one another, and, not be jerks to one another.
Wow.
And
this episode got deep.
Yeah. And I think but that does require a lot of reflection and a lot of learning, and a lot of times communication and saying, hey, you know what? I said this before and I messed up, and I'd rather change and be a hypocrite compared to what I last said rather than not change at all.
Yeah. No, if you're playing a game with a certain amount of people for hours to hours a week, there are those DMs that are like, we go days, man. We go days in the game.
Yeah.
If you're doing that for long stretches of time, you need to communicate well with people. And if people are feeling ostracized or outed or hurt by something that you might have done or someone else might have done, you need to have that open dialogue.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's just how this is going to go. And that's just human nature, man. Baby, everything's complicated. Nothing's easy. You think this is simple? You think this is a game. It's never just a game, bro.
That's right, yeah.
It's always going to get tight and deep. Ooh.
Yeah, that is true. Hey,
that all being said, fuck Tritons.
Yeah, wow. But I will say I want to wrap this up and move on. I know we don't have much time left, but I do want to just put my own little tack on it. I think that if you're going to approach some of these topics, or at least have monstrous races in your game, you need to give it what I've called ample consideration of just hey, how am I presenting monsters in my world? How am I presenting monstrous races in my world? How am I presenting other races in my world? And give ample consideration to your own values and what could be good, what could be bad, and the presentation of that world in comparison to those. You also need to consider, if I do want to just say, hey, orcs are evil, why? Right? Answer that question. Why? If the answer's, well, just cause,
It's what orcs are, man.
Like, come up with a better answer because that's not good.
That feels a little rough to that orc party member you got.
Yeah.
You know,
and that has some implications. But like, if you say, oh, well, it's because like orcs are literally created as just machines of death that, you know, like strike out across the land as the will of this god, then it's like, okay, like that's more interesting and that's more complex.
Or even if you say that orcs in my world come from a blood sacrifice culture, and you're not really going to come across that many orcs that are chill, you know, that might be a better gray area than just saying that. There are the monoliths of D&D are like beholders, aberrations, things that are literally created of evil for evil, evil. Yeah, no, I also want to say that there are people out there who might be listening and going, guys. And I know this is kind of common sense for certain folks. There's a lot of folks out there that this is common sense. But fun fact I've learned from DMing so many parties, common sense abandons most players. So do yourselves a favor and keep that, you know, under your hat. It's so funny, in the middle of this whole episode, I got a text from somebody who is going to be in my next campaign, and they said, hey, can I play a Warforged paladin? And I was like, Warforged, there's another race that's going to be interesting to have them walk. Oh, they're kind of overpowered, man.
Warforged are really cool.
I don't need to sleep. I don't need to eat.
Well, I mean, they do power down, and when they power down, they like can't be woken back up, technically. So that is something that, so like I think they power down for 4 hours at a time. I think, if I'm remembering that correctly. But they like they power down, and if they need to be woken back up, they need to be literally like press the power button and, you know, wait 5 minutes for them to boot up. So that's something.
Robots in the fantasy world are always weird.
But I mean, Eberron and Faerun are a little bit different in that sense, I suppose.
I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, you know, talking about monstrous races, there's definitely a lot of implications that they have to the presentation of the game, as far as your party presentation and how that affects your other people in your party and like how cool and, you know, special other people are. We also talked a little bit about like how that affects the lore and like how those creatures can fit into your setting and how they may not fit into your setting and what to do about that. And then also just this last point, just talking about the reality of like, hey, like be considerate of like how you present, like of how you present like monstrous quote unquote races and their kind of introduction, because that could involve some personal values and things.
Or just be mindful of how you're treating people.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. I think
as casually be a good dude. And if you don't, I'll kill you.
That's fair. But it's kind of cool how they have these expansion packs have kind of this weird, like, overarching meta impact on the game itself, even though they're just 3 to 5 additional races per book.
Right. And by the way, when do you think liches are going to be playable? When can I truly be me, Doc?
Warlocks, aren't they already technically minor liches?
Boo!
Hey.
Boo!
Hey, I mean, I've been sitting here a long time. I've been thinking about multi-classing into Warlock, you know, level 14 fighter.
Can I be your patron?
I mean, that's what I was thinking, right?
Shake my hand and I will give you more power than you have ever had.
I got to think about it. Man. Do I get Eldritch Blast?
All right, everybody. Huh?
Do I get Eldritch Blast?
We'll talk about it.
All right.
Well, I'll make the contract.
All
right, everybody. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate it. We're on Spotify. And I believe we're on iTunes.
We're on
correct?
iTunes. Yeah.
We're on iTunes.
And we're getting onto other platforms soon.
Absolutely. So wherever we're weaseling our way up, the support that you guys have been given so far has been tremendous.
Yeah.
And we are genuinely surprised.
Yeah.
We love you. Thank you very much. And let's go finish this contract, Doc.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. You've just been listening to DumpStat. a podcast presented by Horizon Kingdoms. Horizon Kingdoms is a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition server that's free to play. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and join up on Discord to join in on a new adventure. For more DumpStat, be sure to find us on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe.